Welcome to Life Ablaze. So my guides have indicated to me that the topic for tonight is going to be playing it safe. So let's see what they have to say about that. We are here. We welcome you. We are here this evening to discuss the idea that you have referred to as playing it safe, making safe choices in your lives. Now, we selected this as a topic because this is one of the ideas that you have given much energy to in your collective society. There has, of course, been much discussion in terms of the idea of getting away from this idea, to begin to take risks and to begin to, shall we say, think outside the box. And these are all well and good. And yet, many of you find yourselves in need of strategies in order to move beyond the idea of playing it safe, as you say. And we would say that is because there is still some misconceptions around the behaviors and the actions that you take that are actually in congruence with the idea of playing it safe. First and foremost, you believe that these actions actually keep you safe. Now, before we dive into this topic, we want to remind you of a couple different messages that we have shared previously up until this point. One of which was the idea of illusions. The idea that there are many illusions that you as a society are currently subscribing to, in which you believe you are engaged in one idea when you are actually engaged in another. You are under an illusion. The other video that is of relevance to this particular topic this evening refers to definitions. And again, this is along the idea that we are describing, in the sense that you utilize a certain term or a phrase, believing it to actually mean one particular idea, when in fact, what is actually produced is something entirely different. What is actually engaged in is something that is virtually counter to the idea that you believe you are subscribing to. Now that we have laid the groundwork, so to speak, we will begin to explore this particular idea of playing it safe. And there are lots of different, shall we say, levels of perception that we are going to approach this topic within. Because, of course, our overriding theme is in coming into greater alignment with your higher self. We will get there. Let us begin a bit more simply. Now, the idea of safety. We understand why this is an important concept for you. There are, of course, many different ways that you can find yourselves physically injured or susceptible to certain toxins or disease, or, depending on the circumstances, you may put yourselves at the risk of death. Now, we understand the very strong desire, the instinctual programming that you have to protect yourselves from such things. And we would also understand the idea that you are wanting to protect your loved ones from these circumstances as well. This is, of course, part of the natural programming that you have, and it's part of the survival instinct. We want to begin this conversation in the sense that what we are going to describe here is meant in no way to circumvent the actual programming that you have along the lines of your own actual survival instinct. We are not telling you to put yourselves purposefully in harm's way. We want to make sure that this is emphatically clear before we begin to explore this topic a bit deeper. We do not want to be misconstrued in any way. There are certain situations that you know are far riskier in terms of the consequences that we have just discussed. And we are not suggesting that you then decide to put yourselves in situations that you know are inherently dangerous. This is not our suggestion. That said, we do want to explore the idea that what situations and circumstances that are actually dangerous, the situations and circumstances that are actually dangerous are far fewer than you would give energy to. And so, if you are navigating your lives fearful of one thing after another that could potentially bring you harm in one manner or another, you could spend your entire lives in fear of these things. And many of you do. Many of you live in worry or are hypochondriacs, which in essence, in many ways, create symptoms based on the fear that you feel. Now, the fear that you may feel, you may believe is due to the actual danger. But what you are not perceiving in these particular ideas, along the idea of a hypochondriac, is that you are actually creating a scenario. You are developing it from your vibration of fear. And so this extends to the idea that we are discussing. Safety. Wherein the energy that is put into the idea of feeling safe. I need to do this to feel safe. I need to do this to feel safe. Much of this energy is a reflection of the vibration of not feeling safe. And so, because it is part of the vibration of lack of safety, you are tuning to that frequency. And we know that if your focus is on wanting to increase your safety, that you are most certainly not wanting to increase the likelihood of manifesting and attracting situations where you will feel unsafe, or manifesting the situations where the harm finds you. And so, there is this aspect to begin to understand what you are putting out and what is being reflected back to you. If you have an obsession for safety, whether that be for being protected from diseases, whether it be protecting yourself by having a weapon in your home, there are any number of situations wherein you are operating from the fear of some type of harm coming to you. And when you are operating on that frequency, the fear of said harm, you are attracting that harm to you. And so, we are exploring this topic very deeply and with good reason. We are talking about the idea of playing it safe. And we have only begun to explore one of these words on one of the facets. Now, keeping what we have said in mind, there is the idea of playing it safe. And these are more extrapolations of the idea that we have just discussed, in the sense of taking certain risks in your lives. Now, generally, the idea of playing it safe does not directly correspond to the circumstances and events that we have discussed that could cause you harm. They are, in essence, the next mental level, the extrapolation, the extension of the fear frequency around the idea of safety. So, for instance, if we were to take the survival instinct being the base mechanism of the idea of safety, you want to remain safe as part of surviving. Playing it safe generally has very little to do with the idea of actually physically surviving, but you have attributed the circumstances, the consequences of certain choices, riskier choices or less riskier choices, as you would term them, as being somehow connected to your actual physical survival. But in most cases, there is no direct connection whatsoever. There is only a mental connection between these things. So, for instance, if you were to take a risk at your job that could get you fired from your job, and this gives you great panic, because within your mind, within your beliefs, you believe if you lose this job, all will fall apart, and your survival is no longer guaranteed. You may die from starvation or from any number of situations that it is highly unlikely that you, in your current set of circumstances, would actually experience. But in your mind, tuned into that fear frequency, you may be feeling the fear of this particular worrisome scenario that does not exist unless you manifest it. And so, the idea of playing it safe is actually creating the opposite results of what you are seeking. Playing it safe. You are focused on the idea that you are not safe, and so you must make certain choices to keep you safe. Doing things that in many ways you do not feel congruent with, which then require you to compartmentalize more of yourselves, to be able to put yourselves through these scenarios that you know you do not agree with, that you know are not in alignment with your highest good, that you do not feel right doing. Many of these involve harming others in some ways, or simply not doing the right thing that you know in your heart to be so. And yet believing that if you leave this particular job or this particular scenario, or even a certain conversation, that it will some way harm you. You will not be safe in one way or another. And part of that is the bills that will continue to come. And you must somehow pay for the things that you have signed on and agreed to pay for. And so, this can, in many ways, this idea of playing it safe, can lead you into directions that you do not ultimately want to go, and can have you feeling as if you are tied to these choices. You are not. Your survival is not tied to the things that you typically tie it to. And if you are wanting to come into greater alignment with your higher mind, the more you can accept this understanding, to understand that you survived long before you had these set of circumstances, and you will be here long when they have passed. If they were to end today, this particular job, for instance, you would not simply die at the end of the day. You would go on. And things would change, yes. Things always change. But you would survive, and most likely, if you were tuned to the idea that you were doing the right thing, then things would improve. Now, we want to move to a different level of perception of this idea, the idea of playing it safe. And that is the levels of, shall we say, risks involved with your life choices. What you perceive to be risks, in many ways, are only risking the limited identity that you have ascribed yourself to. And we have recently discussed this idea. What is at risk is just the former limited identity. It is just one small story in the enormous, infinite book that you are. So if you look at it in this way, it is not a risk at all. In fact, playing it safe would essentially mean that you are choosing one short, small story to define your life, when infinite variations and infinite branches are available to you. Now, we are not saying that making a certain set of choices, and shall we say, have a short story, is not of value. This is not what we are saying. What we are pointing out in this particular idea is the idea that most of you may think that that is all you should expect of your life experience. This is your lot in life. And this is what we are pointing out as being simply untrue. You are far more expansive than you give yourselves credit for. And the idea of holding yourselves to a particular identity for fear of the death of that identity limits you, limits what is available to you right now, and limits the expansiveness that you can experience that is your true self. And that is up to you to navigate and to begin to understand in terms of the risks that you take. Only risk the limited identity. Again, in the idea of playing it safe. We are not discussing this particular actual survival. We're not talking about taking those types of risks. We're talking about taking the risks of certain choices. Now, the final level that we want to discuss on this topic, before we end for this evening, is, of course, the multidimensional perspective of safety. All that we have discussed up until this point, essentially, has been from the perspective that you are only a physical being. And this, of course, is not so. It's also from the perspective that this is your only life. And this, of course, is not so. So from this perspective, understanding that you have been here on this planet many different times, in many lifetimes, and you will have many more. then the perspective of physical safety begins to distort a bit, begins to lose its rigid understanding, because you are an indestructible soul. You exist and you will never cease to exist. Your physical form will change. This physical life will come to an end. Yes, but you will not. You cannot. And so the idea of safety is, in essence, from a soul level, absolutely guaranteed. You cannot be unsafe, because even with your physical death, you do not end. You will never be destroyed. You cannot be. And you have the option to return as frequently as you wish, and many of you have, more times than you can understand. And so these risks, these ideas of not playing it safe, but to take action on what you feel is right for you, is actually, from the soul perspective, from the higher mind perspective, the actual compass needle for living the most expansive version of this physical life, because this physical life will never happen again. It is not to be wasted. Do not waste your time imagining that your survival is in jeopardy. Whatever amount of years that you have in this physical life, it is limited. Do not waste it. Yes, you will come back in other lives, but you will never be this person again. Enjoy it. Savor it. Let go of the idea of playing things safe, because you are safe. Know this, and you will know the higher mind's perspective, and you will come into greater alignment. We thank you for the opportunity to present this information to you. We look forward to speaking with you again. Know that you are safe. Know that you are aligned with purpose, and that what you perceive to be risks on this particular level are only the invitations to your own expansiveness. We will leave you with this. We thank you. Thank you so much.